All right. I was going to tell you one of my daughter's favorite stories today, the story of the Minotaur. But in getting ready to tell that story, I realized that there's an important character in the background of that story that deserves a little spotlight time of his own. And that character isn't a hero, isn't a god. He's just sort of a guy. A guy with a pretty spectacular set of skills. And that guy's name is Daedalus. Daedalus is sort of the Tony Stark of Greek mythology, except he doesn't put on his own Iron Man outfit most of the time. Daedalus is the guy who makes things. He creates things. He's a Leonardo da Vinci. He's an inventor. And he invents something very important in the story of the Minotaur. But he invents other things as well. Now, an important thing to know is that Daedalus went to work for a king named Minos. And King Minos was the king of the island of Crete. And Crete was a very powerful island nation, and Minos was a very powerful king. So Daedalus was happy to go work for a rich and powerful king. Seemed like a good deal to him. And the good news is Minos was very happy with the work that Daedalus did for him. The bad news is Minos decided he wanted Daedalus to do more work for him, and he wanted Daedalus to only do work for him. Therefore, Daedalus had to stay. Now, among the things that Daedalus had created for Minos was sort of the ultimate prison, a prison named the Labyrinth. And next week with the Minotaur, we'll talk about why he needed that prison. But once the prison was built, Daedalus got to have his own set of rooms inside it, so that he couldn't escape, wouldn't escape, and would always be there to work for Minos. And Daedalus wasn't the only person stuck in that room. His son, one of his two sons, Icarus, was stuck there with him. And Daedalus' commission was to make things for Minos. His room doubled as a workshop, and he created more things for King Minos. And Minos dominated. And Daedalus wanted to get away. He just did not want to work for Minos anymore. He didn't mind the working part, it was the prisoner part that he didn't like. But Minos wasn't going to let him go. And Daedalus, being clever and being the man who had invented the labyrinth, he could have snuck out of the labyrinth. But if he got onto a ship and tried sailing away from the island, that would be a problem too. Because the coast of Crete was guarded by a giant robot, a giant automaton made out of bronze called Talos. And Talos had been created by, depending on who you asked, either the three Cyclopes or Hephaestus. Either way, the island of Crete was gifted with Talos as a guardian. And Talos would patrol the shores of the island of Crete and would throw giant rocks to smash the ships of anyone who tried to invade Crete. And if they managed to get past the rocks being launched at them and land anyway, well, then what Talos would do is he would throw himself into a huge fire, get his metal body glowing red hot, and then go on a hug fest and burn people alive. Daedalus did not want to have to mess with Talos. And so he needed to come up with a different escape route. And as he sat in his jail cell in the labyrinth, looking out the window, admiring the view, an idea came to him. Because he was watching his son Icarus, who was bored, just like he was. He was watching Icarus feed the seagulls and the other birds that were flying around outside, pulling off little swatches of bread and tossing them out just to watch the birds dive at him and fight over them. And the birds gave Daedalus an idea. And so he gave Icarus the job of, not only do you need to keep feeding the birds, son, I need you to attract birds to the window. And every time a bird drops a feather, collect it. If you manage to yank a few feathers out yourself, all's the better. But I need you to collect feathers, and a lot of them. And meanwhile, Daedalus, while making things still for King Minos, asked for some extra supplies that he convinced Minos were necessary for the projects he was making for him, but really they were for Daedalus's projects. And what he started making was a frame. A frame that was almost as tall as a man and spread across the width of the shoulders as well. And he got some rope and some leather, and he started collecting candle wax as well. And all of this kind of just went under the radar of all the materials that he would normally use to make his creations. And Icarus didn't know what his father planned, but he had faith in his father. He knew his father was brilliant, and he was a loyal son and a loving son, but more importantly, he was a bored son. He was bored out of his mind, and he would do anything that would get him out of that jail cell, and hopefully his dad too. If Daedalus had told Icarus to kiss the birds instead, Icarus would have done it. Anything to get him some freedom. Well, finally one night, Icarus realized what Daedalus was making, because Daedalus took finally what he judged to be a big enough pile of feathers, and he took the feathers one by one, and using the wax that they had collected from the candles, attached each of the feathers slowly to the frames that he had made. And night after night, he did this work slowly, meticulously, making sure that each feather was in just the right spot and fixed securely to the frame with the wax. And eventually, Icarus realized what his father was making. Daedalus was making 2 sets of wings, one for him and one for Icarus. And Icarus couldn't believe his eyes. He's like, "Father, will these really work?" And Daedalus said, "Yes, but let me finish the job first." And so Daedalus kept working. Whenever it was daylight and the guards were watching, he had to hide the work under the workbench. But every night, he and Icarus pulled out the frames and he went back to work. And Icarus kept on getting more and more feathers just in case they needed it, because he wanted these wings to work as soon as possible. And finally the day came. The day came when Daedalus decided they were ready. They were good enough. And first, he attached the frame to Icarus, and it spread across his shoulders, tied around his waist. The wings were secured down to the length of his arms, and Icarus flexed and flapped and practiced with his new wings in the room. He said, "Father, are you sure they'll work?" And Daedalus said, "What I'm sure of is, unless we do something, we'll be here for the rest of our lives. Or at least, we'll be here for the rest of my life. You're not the inventor, son. I'm not sure what King Minos will do for you or with you once I'm gone." And with that sobering thought in his mind, Icarus helped Daedalus secure his own set of wings on. And once they're on, Daedalus climbed up onto the window ledge, took a deep breath, and dove. He dove out and down, and then the drafts captured the wings and lifted him up. And he flew. Icarus did the same thing. He got up on the window ledge, took a deep breath, and dove and flew. And he whooped with joy. He whooped with delight. And he heard his father shouting for him, "Icarus, Icarus, follow me. Flap higher, Talos is coming." And sure enough, the bronze giant was running around the border of the island and reaching out with his hands to grab them. But they caught wind, and they caught a thermal, and they drifted up higher and higher until even the giant Talos could not reach them. And they're flying along, and Daedalus is flying, steady and straight, and Icarus is diving and swooping and whooping with delight. And Daedalus calls out to him, he's like, "Son, son, come to me." And sure enough, Icarus swoops over to him and under him and over him and around him. And Daedalus says, "Please, please, Icarus, you must listen. Do not fly too low, or the water will wet the wings and you will crash. And do not fly too high, or the sun will melt the wax of your wings and the feathers will fall and you will fall with them." And Icarus said, "Yes, yes, father, I got it. And he flew off. And he did get it. He did hear it. But he was a young man. And he was bored in that jail cell for all that time. And he was excited. And finally, he was free. And he saw the dolphins racing along in the surf below, and he swooped down to race along with them. But his flight became erratic, and he had a harder and harder time keeping going, and he realized, the feathers, they're getting wet, so he lifted up. And the feathers dried, and he was safe. But more time passed, and he saw the eagles soaring high above them, and he said, "I bet I could go as high as the eagles." And after all that time locked in the cell, he just wanted to see what he could do. So he flew higher and higher and higher. And he was level with the eagles. He saw the eagles like soaring and turning away from him and shocking and surprised at this huge bird that had now joined him in the sky. And he couldn't resist it. He thought, "I bet I can fly even higher. I bet I can fly twice as high as the eagles." And he aimed himself up higher into the sky, so high that he couldn't hear his father shouting out for him below. And sure enough, the heat of the sun in the sky began to melt, began to soften the wax that was holding the feathers in place. But Icarus was so excited, was so full of joy that he didn't notice one feather after another come loose from his wings, until it was too late. And all of a sudden, feather after feather, clumps of them began to fall free from the frame. And Icarus realized too late what had happened, and he began to fall. And he crashed into the surf, and he drowned and sank, never to be seen by his father ever again. That is the tragic story of Icarus and Daedalus. Daedalus did survive. He managed to fly to another land far off, where he found a king to take him in. And he did wonderful things for that king as well. For example, hot and cold running water, plumbing in the palace. And this king appreciated Daedalus without feeling the need to imprison him. But Minos was looking for Daedalus. And he went from land to land, promising half of his country's treasure to the king who could solve the puzzle. And the puzzle was this. He had a large spiral shell. And he said, the king who is clever enough to thread the shell, to run a thread from one end to the other, would win half of Crete's wealth. Now, king after king tried it. And everyone thought Minos had gone crazy with this bet. Why would he risk this? Why was he even bothering leaving Crete on this weird mission? But finally he came to the kingdom where Daedalus was sheltered, was hiding, was living in secret. And the king that had taken Daedalus in, he wanted that money. And so he brought the shell to Daedalus and said, Daedalus, surely you can figure this out. And sure enough, Daedalus could figure it out. He took the thread and he tied it to the body of an ant. And then he put the ant at one end of the spiral shell and he put a drop of honey at the other. And the ant seeking to get to the sweet, sweet honey, climbed its way through the spiral shell until it came out the other side. Thread followed behind, and the king was able to present this to King Minos. But here's the thing. Minos knew only one person was clever enough to figure out this puzzle. Daedalus. And he said, my friend, my royal friend, I know who you're hiding. I won't give you any of my wealth, but I'll give you this. I also won't invade and take over your nation if you give me Daedalus. The king didn't want to give up Daedalus. He felt guilty. He realized he'd been fooled. And he also didn't want to let Minos win. Minos is a bully among the kings, and we'll get back to that with the story of the Minotaur as well. And Daedalus didn't want to go with King Minos. He had lost his son trying to escape. So they agreed. Minos could take Daedalus, but in the morning. In the meantime, wouldn't he like a bath? Did he know that Daedalus had invented indoor plumbing for the palace, and there's hot and cold running water? Minos did not know that, but once he heard about it, he wanted it, and so he took a bath. Except, once he was in the bath, he got sealed in the bath by Daedalus and the king. And that hot and cold running water, it turned into just hot running water, no cold. And the hot water got turned up from hot to boiling. And so King Minos found himself locked in a tub of boiling water. King Minos didn't make it out of that bath. And so Daedalus never had to go back to Crete. And Crete had lost their fierce king. So the story of Daedalus is not a happy one. His son became the moral of a story. Do not strive too high, or you will crash when you fail. And he himself, his freedom was bought at the life of a king. But also King Minos had been the kind of king that nobody really missed once he was gone. And that's a short story, but it sets us up for next week's story. The story of the Greek hero Theseus and the Minotaur, who that labyrinth had been created for in the first place. But that is next week. So, have a good night.